evening, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Dave Glassner. I'm the superintendent, and really appreciate everybody making time to be here this evening. This evening is part of what we call the Superintendent Series related to detracking. It's really an opportunity to engage on and around and to learn about how our classrooms function in an inclusive, heterogeneous model that we have been implementing for the past few years. And tonight we have really two different parts. We're going to be sharing some recently released and analyzed data with you. So we're excited to be able to do that. And then afterwards, folks will have an opportunity to experience classroom experiences. And we'll go over those logistics in a few minutes. Before I turn over the microphone, I did just want to give a very big thank you to everyone who helped make this evening happen, especially folks from our Learning and Teaching Department, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Dr. John Moore, and others, and also, of course, our teachers who are really leading the way, not just here in Shaker, but around the country. I would even say maybe around the world when it comes to implementing these types of inclusive, excellent, challenging, supportive classrooms, and you'll get to see that this evening. So thank you again for being here. Turn it over to Dr. Moore. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Glasner. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. We're going to do a brief data preview. It'll set us up for some future data discussions in the near months. And then we're going to get you to our classes where our teachers are prepared and ready to welcome you. Before we begin, I want to give one more thanks. We had some of our food science here, 8th grade food science students. Can we give them a round of applause? And thank you for being here. Many of you got to hear a little bit about what they're up to in their food science class. And you'll notice we had Booms here tonight. That is to honor their partnership with Booms, where they're learning some hands-on culinary techniques. And in fact, that partnership is going to result in them creating some toppings and things that Booms will then serve. So thank you, food science folks, for being here, and thanks for Booms for your support. Let's dig in. You'll notice the title here is a preview. It is of things to come. This is a greatest hits album of some of our middle years data. We started this superintendent series last year with a panel and some classroom demos, and we heard loud and clear from community members, we want to know how this is going around some data points. We're happy to share some of that with you here tonight. One of the processes that we undertook was partnering with NWEA, who conducts the Measures of Academic Progress, one of our longitudinal data assessments we give to all of our students. And we commissioned them to run what they call a comparative or a virtual comparative analysis group. And in that virtual comparison group, they match our students based on educationally related factors to other students in that year's time to try to answer the question, when we compare Shaker students to other students like them in a more apples-to-apples way, how are our students growing? Are they growing less, similar, or more than students who are like them in an academic sense? Based on where they started on their RIT score, that's MAP's way of measuring student progress, as well as school-level factors such as urbanicity, free and reduced lunch costs and prices, etc., and so on and so forth. And what we're going to share with you here today is a little bit about what we have found. Our first test will be on an overview of median growth K-8. We'll take an estimate there just to sort of orient ourselves with how this is going to look. And then we're going to dive into some specific middle years performance data. From a K-8 perspective, all in one chart, you see here a comparison of growth in both mathematics and reading. So again, we're trying to answer that fundamental question, how do our students grow when compared with their similar peers? At the 50th percentile, that would mean that they're growing at about the same rate as their peers. Less than 50 would mean that they're not growing as significantly as their typical peer. More than 50 would be exceeding those growth expectations. And you'll see that there is a variety over those grade years. Some grades we now know to pay more particular attention to and support growth in those areas, directing some resources in that regard. And you'll notice, particularly for our 5th to 8th, what is happening from a data perspective with our detracking initiative. One thing I'll draw your attention to, this was last year's fall to spring growth. You'll notice there was somewhat of a dip there in 5th grade. We are wrapping our heads around why that might be. It's worth pointing out that now that our 6th grade has moved to the middle school, our 5th grade has moved to our elementary programming, part of us are wondering if that 5th grade transition was contributing to what we're seeing there in 5th grade. By and large, this chart shows or suggests what we're looking for in upcoming data is more than 50 would indicate we're growing more than typical peers, less would mean we've got room to grow. Let's dive in. What this chart is showing us is where our students are starting from an achievement point at the beginning of the year. And what you'll see there, those bar charts across the rows, represent the starting percentile band of our students in Shaker. We'll take one example. You'll notice that bar that says the 80th percentile, about 13% of our students started the year in the 80th percentile. And just for comparison, at the 30th percentile, you can read down below there, about 8.5 or so. The reason why this graphic is important is it's showing where our students are starting in the year. And what this would suggest is that we actually have more students starting the year on the higher end of the spectrum from a percentile range than not. That becomes really important when you see some of the outcome data. When you flip to a screen like this, which shows math and reading just at our middle years, which is really the epicenter of our detracking work, you'll see, on average, before disaggregation, how our students are performing compared to their peers. 7th grade math is about that 50th percentile, 8th is a little above, and you get the total there. Reading, across the line, a little bit above the 50 again, suggesting they're growing more than their peers. Now note, when this is combined with the previous chart, we know that our students are performing typically higher, and they're typically growing at higher rates as well. Let's break this down a little bit. When we zoom in on middle years math at the middle school, what this is telling us is that students who are at approximately the 40th percentile and above all meet or exceed growth when compared with typical peers. Those at the 20th also meet their typical peers, and we have some work to do around that lower end of achievement, 10th, 20th, 30th percentile. We know we can keep influencing and improving growth there. Said another way with an example. Students in our 90th percentile outgrow about 68-ish% of their typical peers. So this idea from these two charts alone is we've got a lot of students who are performing at the higher end of the spectrum, and those students are outperforming their peers in other districts. Now, it's not just the high-end students here. You'll notice at the 50th percentile, et cetera, they're meeting growth of their peers. Now, this was math. Let's take a look at reading. At reading, students in the 20th percentile band and above are meeting or exceeding all of their similar peers. And in fact, those at the 60th percentile and above significantly outperform their peers with a peak at about that 60th percentile. So, summary of this one, those students who started at the 60th percentile and reading at our middle school outperformed growth-wise about 70th percentile or 70% of their peers. Now, it's important in our district that we stay committed to what this looks like in a disaggregated sense. And this chart shows us where we can target resources, target professional learning, so that we know we can continue to work on closing that opportunity or achievement gap. This is yet another way of breaking down the data that you just saw. One important note, that now that the data has been broken down by ethnic group or race, American Indian, Asian, Black or African American, so on and so forth, please note that while we're disaggregating the data in that way, we are not comparing students within that racial group. Said another way, Hispanic students in 8th grade were being compared to all other students in 8th grade by how much they grew. In this case, our Hispanic students in 8th grade outperformed at about the 66th percentile similar peers when compared to RIT scores, hours of instruction, so on and so forth from there. This was specifically for math, and you'll notice we have work to do on that opportunity gap, certainly. Here's what that looks like for reading. And what a chart like this allows us to do is to really zoom in and refine the work we're doing, particularly around culturally responsive teaching, making sure that we're meeting the needs of all learners, that we are really being intentional and purposeful with the strategies we're using to meet the needs of our diverse learners. One of the questions we frequently get, particularly when we start looking at our Ohio State test scores and the work that we've done around that, some community members were really interested in knowing how Algebra 1 in particular has changed over the years. These numbers represent where we started taking that data of enrollment in 2015 and where we went over time. You'll notice that 2019 to 2020 year was when we really went all in on our Algebra 1 for All initiative. And you'll see some of the greatest changes there in our Black student population, where in 2019 there were just 29 Black students enrolled in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And that jumped to 162 then in that next year. So, what some of this data would suggest is when our students are compared in an apples-to-apples fashion for last year, growth fall to spring, our students tended to be on the higher end of the achievement spectrum. They tended to grow more than typical peers in other districts, and we are serving more students in Algebra 1 than we had been before. And the question that we all, I think, oftentimes wrestle with, we love good data, this is good informative data, it shows us what's working as well as areas of opportunity. Some of the questions that we should be asking now is how are we making this data happen? And that's why we've been so excited to follow up with this more qualitative research from Dr. Maggie Thornton at Rowan University. On December 3rd, Dr. Thornton will be hosting a webinar open to all community members, faculty, staff, etc., to dive in and really start to pick apart the what's working and what's not working around our detracking initiatives. The quantitative data tells a really important part of the story. This part really helps us to unpack the why, the how, the what, etc. What are our teachers doing that is working, and what are our areas to improve? If this data is interesting to you, and we hope that it is, tune back in around January, February. We'll present the entire compilation of data, far more in depth, and you are welcome to join us on the live stream or video